You're training your hip flexors completely wrong and it's keeping you stuck in pain. You're in the right place because in this video I'm going to show you a 3-step process to solve this. What's going on, guys? Dr. Nick back here to go over how to actually work the hip flexor region more effectively. But before we dive into the exercises, we have to figure out and zoom out what we're dealing with. A lot of the hip flexors and understanding where they live and their function can help us really target this area more effectively. So the hip flexors, there's a bunch of hip flexors, bringing the leg bone, the femur, into hip flexion. So what does that? We have the psoas muscle, which has components to it. So the iliopsoas muscle, we have the rec fem muscle, we have the sartorius, we have a bunch of muscles in the front of the hip. At the end of the day, they basically bring the hip up into hip flexion. And when we zoom out and we think about the hip flexors, we want to think about just lines of tension. The hip flexors live on this front part. So the stretches that we're going to be doing is addressing all of this tissue in the front versus being so specific and saying, I'm only hitting the psoas, or I'm only hitting the rec fem, or I'm only hitting the sartorius muscle. All those muscles have function in hip flexion. So a better approach is to just work on the things that do hip flexion and stretch what needs to be stretched or strengthen what needs to be strengthened. A lot of times when it comes to tightness around this region, other components that are missed are strengthening areas opposite of the joint, such as the glute muscles. So in this video, we're gonna go over a 3-step process to address the hip flexor region much more effectively. So we're gonna start with the classic hip flexor stretch. Oftentimes, people just jack their leg up way too fast and try to get deep into the stretch. But the thing is, adding specificity to this can play a huge role in actually getting you better results a lot quicker than just trying to get further into the stretch like this or jack your leg up on something thinking you're getting further into it. The common mistake with this really is when you try to put your leg up too far, you're gonna default into hip flexion and get your butt to your heel or your heel to your butt. That's less effective than getting your hip into hip extension and then rocking back, which keeps the hip in that neutral or extended position, which biases that tissue much more effectively. So in this stretch, we're gonna be in out of a range of motion and work on the specificity to this. So we're gonna go over a contraction and a relaxation phase while we're in this stretch. And there's other things that we could build off of this, but this one, we're gonna be focusing on just the contraction part. So from here, we're in this stretch, we're sitting up nice and tall. I squeeze my glutes, I squeeze my abs, and I just shift my weight forward until I feel a stretch. Once you feel the stretch, you're gonna hold that for a period of time. Imagine 30 seconds has just went by. After 30 seconds, you wanna kick down by generating isometric force into the box that you're on. From there, you're gonna feel all of your quad muscles working. You're gonna hold that for a contraction period, say 10 seconds. After that, you relax totally, and then you just shift your weight forward more while squeezing your glutes and your abs. This will get you more into the range of motion in a strategic manner versus just trying to force it where you're arching from your back or you get your leg too high and you default into hip flexion. So let's recap this again. So we're up nice and tall, we squeeze our abs, squeeze our glutes, we shift forward until we feel a stretch. 30-second stretch goes by, I push down for 10 seconds, feeling the quad working, and then you wanna build up to your safest, greatest effort. I don't wanna just be pushing down just very gently. You wanna push down where you really feel yourself working, hold the contraction for 10 seconds. After that, you relax totally. You shift your weight forward until you feel a new stretch, and you repeat that entire sequence again. So then it'd be a 30-second stretch, 10-second contraction, relax, shift yourself further into it. And typically with this, I like to get about 4 rounds. That's because you're stretching the tissue for 2 minutes of time under tension. You really want to aim for that 2-minute duration of time so that you get more effectiveness and bias to the tissue that you're actually working. So this particular one, we just did a contract relax, also known as P&F pattern or P&F stretching. So it's a contraction and then relaxation, you move further into the range. This helps initially loosen everything up that you're gonna be moving more into in the next stages. Now that we loosened up the hip flexor region from the first stretch, we now wanna put it through a lengthening motion, eccentrics, We're gonna be using a little bit of support here. This doesn't need to be connected to a stall bar like I have. It could be anything. You can use a band, anything that you can have in front of you that you can use to support yourself with. So we're taking the concepts of doing this more specific. Now we're gonna be eccentrically loading the front tissue, so we have to put it on length. Now we do that by squeezing the glutes, squeezing the abs. We're gonna using this for support as I rock my body back towards my heel. Now you'll notice when you're doing it, when you're going to a point, there'll be a point where you feel like you can't go any further, because one of two things are gonna happen. One, you're gonna feel like you just have to drop your butt to your heel, or you're gonna feel like you just cannot get off, or you can't get up from that position. So when you do that, you wanna push to a range of motion where it's challenging, and then you use whatever you're using that's attached to bring yourself up. That's where we're gonna be biasing this hip flexor region or the hip flexor stuff in the front of the thigh eccentrically, ultimately improving the extensibility to this region. So here's how it looks. Squeeze my glutes, squeeze my abs. I rock my body back, feeling all of this work. This is right there, that's all I got. And then I'm bringing myself back. And I'm gonna repeat this. I like to get eccentrics, typically 12 to 15 reps. More reps, you get more input to this region. And then I come back. Now I wanna make sure I'm not overpowering with my arms. As I go back, I'm not relying on my arms to do this, because when I do this, I feel nothing in my hip flexors. Versus when I have a good mind-body connection to control this motion with my hip flexors, and then I pull myself back up to the start position. So I'm controlling, notice how they're slack, controlling, then I come back. That's biasing all of this area. Now you wanna work into your available ranges and not just default and try to get further, because you're doing it less effective. As an example, if I go down like this and I try to just go further and further, right there I just bent my hip into hip flexion, and yeah, I can get my heel to my butt, but I'm not stretching my hip flexors anymore. I'm slacking it because I'm in hip flexion. You wanna stay in a hip extended position or hip neutral position, stay straight as you rock back, and you're biasing all of this tissue versus defaulting into hip flexion like that. So stay up, you work into your available range, and then you pull yourself back up, really biasing all of this tissue to the front part of the leg. Now that we loosened up the hip flexor region, we eccentrically loaded it, we opened up all of the front part of the hip. Now we have to work on the opposite side of the joint, so we teach it how to function in this new range of motion. If all of this is stiff and we loosen it up, working on the opposite side teaches the body how to control this motion. Versus if you never work the opposite side, it's just gonna default back into this position and not be trusted in that position, leading to a lot of stiffness for prolonged periods of time. So here's the exercise that we're gonna be doing. Instead of just doing this classic one where you kick the leg up to the sky, using your glute muscles where a lot of compensations happen anyways, we're gonna bias it much more effectively. So from here, I have a weight right in front of me. One leg is gonna be bent. I'm gonna rock back all the way as far as I can. Now from here, I'm just gonna be holding on to this for a little bit of anchor. Now my left leg I'll be working on. So from here, I straighten my leg, and from here, I wanna keep it locked out straight and try to use only my glute muscles to lift my entire leg off the ground up towards the sky as far as I can. From there, I just lift off, come back down. So this is end range hip extension lift-offs. Now the idea is you're not gonna get far up. It's actually gonna be really hard. You're gonna feel your abs working, you're gonna feel your shoulders working, you're gonna feel everything working. But it's mind-body connection to use the glute and the hamstring muscles to get your leg up towards the ceiling, keeping it straight. You don't wanna default into like this. You wanna keep it straight, lift up, hold, come back down. This, again, more reps. You can range 3 sets, 10 to 15. You can add holds to it to make it more challenging. But the idea is you want to get yourself repping out using your glute muscles to work. So I'm working my hip into hip extension and I'm activating into that, which teaches my body to stretch the hip flexors by using my glute muscles. From here, you're working on that end range control ultimately improving the function at the hip. So I hope this video was helpful in understanding more of a process behind addressing the hip flexor region and gave you some insight and value to really zoom out and figure out what we're actually working on in a step-by-step manner. So I really do hope this was valuable to you. And if it was, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe down to my channel down below. It really helps support the channel. Leave any comments down below, like this video, and I will see you on the next one.